Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds.
Greetings and salutations, seekers. Once again, this is your bond from across the pond, Seana Collins, and today we are going to be speaking with David Parry in a little special edition again that I'd like to call Getting to Know Your Co-Host. Now, as many of you know, as you listen in from all across the US and the UK, the universe and the multiverse, from AM to PM, sunrise to sunset, depending on when you choose to take a look at the YouTube channel and see what is new with THA Talks and our spin-off projects as they come along. You'll know that David and Paul have been very busy on stage as of late, and David has also taken his work with theatrical to another level, in which it's kind of a feast or famine situation in theater, and right now he is eating well. David has been super busy and has been kind enough to take some time and speak with me so that we could let our fans know what he's been up to and a little bit more about what it is that makes Mr. David Parry tick. So without further ado, let's roll on through and speak with our resident youngin, Mr. David Parry. Hello, David. Long time no speak.
My wonderful Seana, it has been indeed, but it's wonderful, truly wonderful to speak to you again.
I know, it's been a very long time. We had a nice conversation, but some gremlins in the works and we weren't able to record it before. Hopefully everything will go well this time and our listeners can find out what you've been up to.
I hope to share any news and all news with them. We're all family on THA.
Definitely. So I know that you have been on the stage a lot.
Where to begin? I mean, don't forget. I mean, it's like buses. You know, if you're a theatre professional, they either all come at once or there's nothing. So it's always like buses. And things had been a little thin over the last year before that. But I was asked to portray a cameo of Alfred Hitchcock in Nick Pallas's Hitchcock homage, and I thought, right, that's the green light. Other things are going to come along. And Paul Wilson, who's a colleague, although living in Australia, I mean, we're both tied in with the Central Asian mob, had written a quite remarkable script called Shakespeare Tonight. They'd already put it on the stage in, I think, a student festival over in Sydney, Melbourne. I'll have to check that, do forgive me. He said, read the script, what do you think? It did need a bit of development, I felt. We went through it together, which of course is common practice in theatre. I made a few suggestions, some of which he incorporated. And I felt it was ready for its British debut. I mean, you know, for instance, little things. Like he'd originally put Master of the Queen's Rebels as a title for one of the alluded to characters in the play. And then he thought, well, in Australia, will that make any sense? Of course, the answer is no. But, you know, when I discovered that, I said, well, no, we need that back in, because in this part of the world, it will make sense. And people will know what you're getting at. So, you know, there's a lot of theatrical horse trading going on. Eventually, it got to casting. I couldn't think of a more perfect, cheeky chappie to play the Duke than my dear friend Paul Ovatelli. Who took the stage by storm. I don't think he realises it to this day. If ever somebody proved to be a natural player, a natural thespian, it's really him. He was wonderful. He's the big discovery of the play. Don't forget, most of the others were professionals. You know, he's not a professional, even though he's got a strong professional background in music. But, you know, Paul needs to act. So eventually we got into rehearsal at St. Peter's. in Clapham because they cut us a very fine deal indeed in rehearsal space. Then we took it to the Camden Fringe Festival for the first week of August. We had a brief lull because the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I mean, basically the Edinburgh Festival nowadays, the biggest, the largest, the most prestigious theatre festival in the world. Everybody goes there. The entire industry goes there. Big shows, small shows. Hollywood goes there. Bollywood goes there. So, you will bump into people you need to meet. And I'm the only one who had played Edinburgh before out of the ensemble, I gathered. So I wanted to break them into it gently, even though sort of in real terms, there's no way of doing that. We prepared. We got a minibus up to Edinburgh. We had a wonderful theatre, Paradise in Green, Paradise in Augustine's, as it calls itself during the festival. A church that's converted into theatre space. Very, very fine building indeed. I'd use it again. Near the Mile. I mean, 5 minutes walk from the Mile. And, we played up there for a week. Severe learning curves I was afraid of, but that's good sometimes for most of the cast. But we came off well. I mean, we got some temperamental reviews. We got some good reviews. There's nothing neutral in theatre. For instance, one of the reviewers, who again must remain nameless, took a couple of pot shots at the actors. And I thought, that's very interesting. Let's find out who she is. And of course, it turned out she had stakes in another show called Shakespeare for Breakfast. So, there's nothing neutral. We're family in theatre, but there's nothing neutral. The audiences adored it. The script is fine. There are no plans to stage it in Britain next year. I think Paul Wilson is doing some more Australian festivals. There are plans to do it over here again in 2018. But of course, who knows what will be happening in 2018? So I've said tacitly, I agree in principle, but we'll see what happens next. So that's August. At the moment, I'm creative director for Victor Sobchak's. Victor Sobchak, by the way, is an old colleague of mine. I mean, we haven't had the chance to work together, but we've been circling each other like predators for years. He's not only the creator of Art Vic, Anglo-Russian theatre Vic, he is a formidable director with a very, very strong vision in his own right. I was asked finally to take a position as a creative director in his interpretation of Nabokov's Invitation to a Beheading, which we are naming Cincinnatus after the central character. And I can do most of the things in abundance I didn't have the chance to do with Shakespeare tonight. Psychology, characterization, simply because there's more time. And in fact, I came from one of the rehearsals I was conducting this afternoon to do this interview. So that's on Barons Court Theatre, 8th of November to the 28th, with plans to take it further next year. So, what's the last theatre thing? I'm probably at a theatre conference in December in Tel Aviv to round the whole year off. So lots of travelling and lots of fun, but all work, of course. The glory of having a temperamental profession like being a theatrical is that, yes, you don't have stability, and you sacrifice that. One sacrifices those things, but you do have lots of fun disguised as work.
So there's a good balance there for this year. It's been maybe at the beginning of the year was, like I said, a little bit thinner, but the way that it's rolling out for the end of the year keeps you extremely busy on the theatrical side.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, there's talk, which is nearly 90% certain that by next April, I'll be invited to become a professor of drama at Osh State University. That's in Central Asia. I mean, most of my serious work, most of my academic work for years has been around Central Asia. And there is talk that one of my dear friends in Hollywood, Cyrus Yavner, who of course is a very good middleweight producer. I mean, he did 24 with that awful Kiefer Sutherland. I hope he's listening. He's done, what's that thing going around at the minute? Supernatural. He's one of the principal producers for that. He's got a wonderful filmography. The only bit I'm totally jealous of is the fact he worked with Charlton Heston. I'm absolutely, totally green with envy over that. But he's also a very fine playwright. He sent me a script of his well over a year ago now called SMP, which, of course, young girls like yourself probably, even though you're American, may not remember. I mean, that sort of LA speak from the 80s, you know, SMP, sex, money, power, the only verities in life, sex, money, power. He sent that as his first stage production to me, wanting to know my opinion. It's a beautifully written play. It reminds me very much of David Hare. Certainly, I think we need to tinker around with it a little because it must adapt possibly to Central Asian stages without giving too much away, as well as the West End. And, you know, what people can't do these days is concentrate. We've all got to face it. But that's certainly a project we're already in the process of discussing. My dear friend from Bishkek, Sultan Rayev, who is the most important impresario, playwright, poet of the entire region, has already more or less agreed to produce. I'll direct. And we're thinking of putting that on at Osh. Maybe I'm taking one of Victor's plays across. Maybe I'll be staging one of my own. I'm not entirely certain yet. And, you know, so all that's happening. And the only other sort of discernible theatrical plan is next November. I'll be striding the boards again. I'm simply not doing enough acting myself at the minute. In one of Ionesco's works, which I mustn't say because I was told not to, with the remarkable Armenian actor Gary Voss, who was my Sir Francis Drake in Shakespeare Tonight. I mean, you know, in the 80s, when I first moved to London, everything was experimental theatre. Art was religion. I've always sort of believed that anyway. And, you know, we were running around insulting people, offending people. You couldn't do that nowadays, of course. You know, getting them to think, getting them to appreciate as far as we could the aesthetic experience. And Ionesco, I mean, he's normally considered the father of absurdism. If one looks at plays like The Bull Soprano, I think it goes much further than that. You know, and absurdism itself is misunderstood. Is he saying, oh my God, life is silly? No, of course it's not. You know, it's much deeper than that. Is there meaning and value in the universe? That's really what absurdism is asking. My reading of his scripts, as in The Bull Soprano, which we used to put scenes on for audiences in the 80s, is it verges on nihilism in the strictest sense. You know, forget all that highfalutin cosmic stuff. Does your life make any sense? Do your relationships make any sense? Is there a reason to get up tomorrow morning? Of course, which raises religious questions if you begin to think about it. So for me, Ionesco actually goes a lot further than people say. And we're putting one of his plays on in London, a very risky undertaking, to my mind, bearing in mind the sort of audiences you get nowadays. But that will be next November. And as I say, it's one of my ways of keeping acting, which I've sort of let slip with my writing responsibilities over the last year or so. Oh, my God, am I just rabbiting on, Seana? Shut me up. David,
No.
be quiet.
No, but I want to go back to something you mentioned about the attention deficit that we have now with audiences. Mm-hmm. And if you've noticed, I went to a concert with my sister a couple of days ago, and I noticed that there was such a prevalence of smartphones and people paying less attention to the performance that was going on the stage and paying more attention to how many likes the picture of the performance on the stage was getting, or, you know, interacting. And I can understand, okay, you paid for your ticket, you can enjoy the show however you want. However, this was not this was not the experience at other events that I've been to before this one. Now, it's been a minute since I've been to a show, but I found it mind-boggling that you would, instead of actually enjoying it, you're enjoying it through the lens of your smartphone or experiencing it through the lens of your
Yeah.
smartphone, or just not really paying attention to what's going on the stage. And I don't understand why people would pay money to experience something and then not experience it. So I'm wondering if you've noticed a trend, upward trend of that within the audiences for theatrical performances as well.
Well, I mean, it's across the board, isn't it? Audiences are changing. I don't think anyone really denies that. Audiences are changing. And that's neither good nor bad. It's simply the case. It's simply the process. It's simply those cultural and social processes that are sweeping us all along. It makes it more difficult to deliver, to create the traditional aesthetic experience on a stage in a concert hall than it was previously, to my mind, if that's what one is trying to do. I mean, curiously, a British playwright called Howard Barker keeps coming up in the rehearsals I'm holding for Cincinnatus. Bumped into a couple of years ago. Moody bugger. No, I hope he's moody bugger. I mean, he started the Theatre of Catastrophe, and I must admit it must have been the zeitgeist, because I was pondering similar ideas years back, but he actually got down, sat down and did it. And his view and his work is wonderful. I mean, if he feels an audience is getting the plot too easily, he will rewrite the scene to make it 10 times more difficult to work out. And he would say very clearly, if he was in the room, if he was part of this discussion, there is no collective audience response now. So, okay, what do? We do something else. We worry about individual responses and challenging people aesthetically in their own way and on their own level. He believes you can only reintroduce, forgive me, Howard, if you are listening, I know I shouldn't speak for you. One can only really do that by concentrating on the true verities: violence, sexuality, beauty. And he feels that's the only way. Politics. I mean, he feels that's the only way we can reintroduce the aesthetic experience, but it must be more piecemeal nowadays. Maybe he's right, I don't know. Certainly, I concede the fact that if we're looking at something traditional, and unless one is going to Glyndebourne or something like that, the Royal Court, or one is at the Royal Opera House, it's much more difficult to induce, because one needs the sort of a scenery, one needs the building, one needs the architecture, one needs the social pressure to turn your phone off for that to actually happen now. But if we're looking at mid-range theatre, mid-range music, mid-range circus acts, we've all got to think, okay, where are the young? How are we engaging with them? And it's our responsibility to think of ways of doing that, not theirs. And the added corollary, the amount of dross that passes as theatrical performance nowadays, and music. My background's in comedy. I've never really understood that. Not that I'm claiming to be Mr. Serious. I suppose lots of people think I am. Because comedy is much more difficult to present on stage than drama. If people don't get the joke, they don't get the joke, and everything falls flat and dead. So comedy is much more demanding, and it requires 10 times more skill sets, to my mind, than drama.
I would agree with that 100%. It actually rolls right into where I wanted to ask about the entertainer's responsibility to the audience. Recently, I was listening to another alternative radio show, and they were speaking with one of the writers of National Lampoon.
Yeah.
They recently put out the first album in 35 years, and it was called "Are There Any Triggers in the House?" Because it's a exercise in satire, and I was wondering where satire falls, and it's great that you bring up comedy, because it is such a vast genre in which it seems like there's a lot of people just just getting by with it, and that means that the voices that are more poignant are left unheard. So
Yeah.
between your absurdism and satire, is it not the performer's job to kind of affect the audience? And then where do you draw the line with that? Because there's so many taboos in today's culture.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
seems like we're all very, very sensitive. And how can you find a way to perform entertainment in a way that makes people think without being so overly offensive that your show becomes boycotted?
I mean, we are all oversensitive, which is why I think, to round off that point, comedy can get away with murder, which drama can't, curiously. And there's nothing more serious than comedy, of course. I do think it's the responsibility of writers, players, producers, directors to meet the audience where they are. But it's also the perennial responsibility of us mobbing the arts to challenge. And again, the parameters, the rules of engagement will change from generation to generation. I mean, I think some of the things that are happening. And a friend of mine's Camilla Paglia. I mean, one needs to read what she was saying recently about these things. The fact there are now safe spaces in university, and one mustn't say things when in those spaces when it took centuries to get free speech. I think we've got to be very careful what it is we're being sensitive about. And there's the real danger we'll end up with a civilization of little princesses. Both genders are included in that. As opposed to people stimulated and challenged. And also, I'm willing to bet if it's not a public spectacle, each of those people likes being stimulated and challenged. So is it the responsibility of theatricals, excuse me, musicians, etc., to engage with the audience as it is? Of course it is. But at the same time, we must never forget, we stretch boundaries. That's what the serious arts do. I mean, it depresses me in London at the moment, the city of Shakespeare, that, if I say theatrical performance to somebody, they will think entertainment. They won't think theatre can be many, many different things. It can be an experiment. It can be a literal offence. I'm now attacking your belief system. And all of those things are valid as a part of theatre. How we do them depends on the skill sets of the production and the audience we're homing in on. And I think maybe theatricals in particular have to pay much closer attention to that over the next couple of decades.
To make sure that we're keeping the rights that we fought so hard for, but at the same time finding that respect for people. Is that, I mean,
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot less interactive or integrated performance that's going on, at least on my side of the pond. People seem to be afraid to push those boundaries because there are some very strict reservations against public displays or assembly or free speech, and it seems like people have forgotten, we fought for these things. And you're just going to let them go because somebody hurt your feelings.
Well, I think we're on the same wavelength there. I mean, and how do we measure, the depth of feeling that's been hurt? I mean, or are we posturing? My own impatience with political correctness, I mean, it started off as a good idea to my mind. Let's not just be rude about each other for the sake of it. A wonderful film comes to mind, Far From Heaven. Trying to remember the actors in it. There was one very famous guy who was the repressed gay. And the dialogue, the crisp writing was so clever because it revealed the level of prejudice on every single level, everybody against everybody else. That was, one of the defining characteristics of Western society, whatever that means, in the 50s, 40s, 50s. So political correctness, as far as I recall it, because it started before I was a teenager, was a good idea, but that's certainly not what we're dealing with now. What we're dealing with now is a much more scary form of thought control based on the rather mistaken premise that if something isn't being said, it's not being thought. And if we're not careful, that will play into the hands, to my mind, of very reactionary forces indeed. It worries me a great deal. We must challenge each other. We must dialogue honestly if there is to be a future at all outside of the remit of some type of totalitarianism, whether that totalitarianism is right or left, both of which, of course, I'm against because I'm a diehard, totally committed libertarian.
And I definitely wanted to get your perspective on this because you are also a resident Jungian. I wanted to know where the ego and the id kind of fell into the concept of, I've been so triggered, or I don't know how to react to or handle sarcasm. I'm incapable of having a debate or a heated discussion without feeling attacked. It seems like that's something my generation has kind of embraced, is the idea of passivity. And, well, let's just not discuss it at all because we have different opinions on it. And just because I disagree with your view does not mean that I don't want to know you as a person. In fact, I want to know you more because you have such, differing opinions that maybe I can learn from that, or I can grow from that and evolve and become either, a more aware person, a more advanced, in my spiritual experience by being able to view and understand the opposite side. And it just seems like there's less of an opportunity to experience that with my generation because people become offended and they shut down. And there's no way to bring them back after that.
We recently did an interview with a very old friend of mine, the Reverend Dr. Robert McTeague of the Society of Jesus. If ever there was an opening line, that's an opening line. And he was teasing me in the show that I always liked postmodernism. I've got a sympathy for postmodernism. And I do. I think Pomo was a response to modernism in the sense that people realized there was something wrong with modernism and they couldn't quite put their fingers on what, but there was something missing and there was something fundamentally human that was missing, which is the beginning of my answer to what you've just said. I mean, modernism is the reification of the rational mind, the conscious, everyday, empirical self telling itself that it's the ruler of the universe. By the power of my reasoning, I will solve the riddle of the universe, the puzzle, the laws, the foundations. I mean, if ever there was a modern definition of hubris, that really is it. And of course, hubris is the one sin the gods punish in this life, according to the ancients, which I think we need to recall. Anything irrational, emotive, intuitive, I do not mean that in a psychic sense, although I'm perfectly aware that the very serious psychics are saying it's a continuum, and that needs exploring as well. Anything that originates from the subconscious was viewed with either suspicion or disdain. Oh my God, that's only. If I had a pound coin for every time I've heard that, and I will be sat in the room thinking, what the hell are you talking about? That can sweep away your conscious resolve whenever it wishes to. The whole point of the sane, rational mind is that it can be crushed in an instant if there's war within the individual psyche. And people then get neurotic very quickly. So there's, to my mind, a phrase I keep using this evening, there's an explosion of the shadow, as Jung would have called it. The shadow was tired of being kept under such tight wraps for so long, and it sort of the shadow always emerges after a time of trauma. So if we take World War II as the mechanism by which, rationality, hey, this is what we've all been led to, a rational plan to destroy each other. That's when the shadow starts shaking its saber and rattling its chains and thinking, okay, enough is enough. Now we've got to go down different routes and explore the trans-rational or the subconscious or the irrational itself, whatever that is, because that's actually very complex. I suspect that's really what's going on at the moment. And we've got to make a deal with it. What we cannot do, once that genie is out the bottle, what we can't do is demand it gets back in. That's not within our power. But we can negotiate, as people did in centuries past, civilizations as well as individuals. We can say, look, you have commanded the stage now for some time. And we need to live our lives. We need to live more effectively. We need to live with greater humanity. You've reminded us of our failings. You've reminded us of our limitations. But we really need to be able to talk now, and we really need to be able to communicate about difficult things without you reducing my sense of reason, without you diminishing my sense of self-worth. We now need to speak again. Whether our society chooses to do that or not is a very big question, because other younger, healthier societies are not feeling that type of challenge. They're in a very different sociological and psychological mindset to us. And whether, we've got the resources to do that, again, is a moot point, and some people would say no. But I suspect as a dear friend of mine, Maggie Steinway, the head of Young Club London, said a couple of meetings ago, the energies themselves changing, and we just need to keep an eye on them to see what's happening at the moment.
Would you say that with our modern understanding of medicine, we've kind of medicated the shadow to the point that we're not listening to it? I personally, my thoughts are that, people become uncomfortable and they take a pill. They're not dealing with or addressing their shadow self, which I'm not sure what that's doing, but I would have to think it's detrimental.
Well, we've got to remember that the shadow doesn't represent evil. We're looking at a much more yin-yang sort of thing. There is evil in it, but it is not evil. It's the repressed. It's the unallowable. You see, every time I think of novels like Brave New World, Huxley, which I admire endlessly, that really is the rational mind deluding itself again that it's got that type of control over the shadow. I will now take a pill to keep you quiet. But the minute I've taken the pill, the rational mind is no longer in control. I think our civilization is shouting so loudly, I am still in control, I am still in control, that we've actually not noticed that we're not. Medication, I mean, that's, unremunerated medical advice is always so questionable. I suspect we're just not in control of these things at all. And no matter what chemicals are affecting the brain, those forces are really the forces that we're unleashing, whether we realize it or not. We're not suppressing those very human and those very non-human, those very primary, those very primordial forces that help make us up. We're not really repressing them. We're giving them different shape and form, but it's not really possible for either medicine or rationality to really do what we think we're doing to those things. I mean, there's a wonderful scenario. I mean, it reflects a scenario in 1984, and I don't think there was any cross-fertilization between the writers. I don't think Orwell or Huxley had anything, any contact or exchanging letters, but there's exactly the same scenario in both books. There's one in 1984 where basically Winston has been left after terrible torture in his cell with a piece of chalk and a black, a slate to write on. And he writes the word God. And O'Brien, monitoring the cell, of course, thinks that's interesting and goes down to the cell and says, tell me, Winston, do you believe in God? And Winston says, well, I used to, I don't know what I think anymore. And O'Brien replies, belief is good, Winston. I believe in God. And in every generation, God manifests in a different way. In our society, God is power. And I am one of the high priests of power, Winston. You know, a chilling, threatening, terrifying encounter, which for me is dwarfed in significance, as powerful as that is, by nearly the same scenario in Brave New World. Mustafa Mond, you know, the genetic elite, one of 7 world controllers. He's world controller, I think, for Britain and Central Europe, as far as I recall the story. Is in a situation of confrontation with the savage. I mean, someone that's been born outside of their perfect system. And the controller's slightly annoyed, so he invites the savage into his office and says, "Tell me, Mr. Savage, have you ever read the Bible? It's one of the banned books. I've got a copy on my shelf." And the savage says, no, I've never read that. And the world controller repeats, "Well, you know, it's good to believe in things. Do you believe in anything, Mr. Savage?" To which the savage replies, "Well, I used to believe in good and evil spirits." And again, you know, mirroring the other scenario, excuse me, which cannot be mirrored. I mean, it must again been in the zeitgeist. The world controller, Mustafa Mond, says, "In every society," I'm paraphrasing, "God takes a different form. In our civilization, God is pleasure. Nobody wants to rebel, Mr. Savage, apart from you." That is much more chilling to me. You know, 1984, the plebs, maybe they'll get sick of the party. Maybe they really want some change. But if everybody's delirious and they're half drugged, and the shadow is killing them anyway, even though they don't notice it, and hey, go and have some casual sex, don't worry about it, that civilization would last forever. And that's, I suppose, my worry for the way the shadow's manifesting at the minute. It's conquering rationality with mindless pleasures, and we're only really half aware of it, and that terrifies me a lot more.
It is
I
scary.
don't know if that answered you, Sean.
Well, you bring up 2 of my favorite books, so I would have to say it's a good explanation of where you're seeing things going as well. I've voiced the concern about where society is heading right now, based on those stories as well. Just kind of looking at, well, it's harder to understand the psychology, so let me go ahead and take a soma and go on a vacation and not have to worry about it for another 12 hours. But the unrest that we have right now, you know, our mainstream media is pushing a lot of fear porn. And so you have your power, you have your pleasure, and then you also have this restrictive sense of fear, where if you go past those first 2, you're going to run into kind of the borderline of what's acceptable. And that's where the fear comes in, is they have this kind of wall up that says, okay, well, you don't want to play in the playground of instant gratification over here, and you don't want to be distracted by all of the amusing, crazy things that are going on right now, like how Pokemon Go is replaced by vicious clowns, and how, you know, we have this bread and circus of our current presidential election. I definitely want to get your thoughts on that. So if you don't want to get involved in that, and you don't want to get involved in the instant gratification and all the new toys that are coming out, then we want to make you worry about martial law. And if you speak out too much, your name's going on a list and you're going to disappear. So these are your 3 choices. You can live in fear, you can be distracted, or you can be amused.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I personally read the modern need to run away from the metaphysical into the trivial as basically an act of bewilderment. I mean, you know, is there a spell being cast over humanity? Yes, there is. I mean, Paul and I would disagree about who is casting it and why they're casting it. But I think, one must be quite limited to think that's not happening. I mean, the corporations are designed for shareholders to make money. Yes, they are trying to indoctrinate. Politics, what's left of politics, is doing the same. I mean, the trouble with politicians is they're still in the world of 1900s decision-making before the global economy, and deluding themselves that they can make America or they can make Britain great again when, well, actually, no, in the global economy you can't. You've got to, for reasons of trading, negotiate with everybody, whether you like it or not. So there's a certain amount of disinformation, there's a certain amount of misdirection. And remember, I have a bit of a background as a stage magician. 2/3 of stage magic is misdirection. You're getting the guy to look in the other direction when you want him to. Certainly all that's going on. I think a lot of it's just, as I say, pure and simple bewilderment. People, our civilization, Western society, is very noisy. It's noisy to stop people thinking. It's putting a lot of work into that. I think the biggest phobia on the part of the powers that be is that somebody somewhere might just get 5 minutes of peace and quiet, and oh my God, what are they going to start thinking then? And another of my favorite books is The Pyramid by Ismail Kadare, who I sort of know, actually, a very, very great writer who will never get the Nobel Prize for a number of reasons, not only his ethnic origin, but the fact he writes about ethnicity. But the Pyramids are a wonderful book, which, of course, I mean, he's from Albania, so I suppose I had better get it out of the way. The rigidly communist state which even Moscow disapproved of. And, the head of the party in that country was practically all-powerful, which, of course, isn't the idea of socialism. And so Kadare is writing about ancient Egypt, I suppose. And there are these wonderful scenes. The new pharaoh has just come to the throne, and the priesthood is very happy. He's under control. He's not saying anything. He's doing what he's meant to do. And at his first court, he says very aloud, maybe I don't want a pyramid like my father or my grandfather. And there's a momentary hiatus. And it's so shocking for him that no one's responded. He's not even sure he said it aloud to himself. So he just passes it off, and the priesthood passes it off. And it gets later in the year, and there's another ceremonial occasion where Pharaoh, the god of the Nile, has to make another speech. And this time he thinks, well, I'll make it more plain. Maybe they didn't get my gist. And he says, look, I don't want to do what my father did. Maybe we should stop building pyramids. But this time the high priest feels he has to respond and says, light of the universe, majesty of the Nile, if we don't build pyramids, the people will have leisure time. If people have real leisure time, they will begin to think. If they begin to think, light of the world, the whole of Egypt will fall apart and you will be its first victim. Is it really what you're suggesting? Is it really what we should do? And of course, after that, Pharaoh decides to keep quiet because he's been told a few home truths by the real governing authority, the priesthood. So, I sort of see something comparable to that, I suppose. Shout and scream and get Pokemon Go, anything you can to stop people actually sitting down and thinking, what the hell am I doing? Is this the sort of life I want? There's no quality in any of its areas. Is it the future I'm going to leave for my children, my grandchildren? And that's openly discouraged. Whether it's this sort of Illuminati orchestrated experience, I singularly doubt. I know Paul, if Paul was here now, he'd start shouting at me. And I know the Illuminati exist because they asked me to join. And I told them very politely it wasn't really my cup of tea. So, no, I mean, I can't, that human beings don't work like that. Even amongst the super elite, no matter what they are, no matter where they are, they will disagree about things too. They will have different visions. It's like ancient Rome, the big cats in the Senate were constantly trying to outmaneuver each other. Any one of them could have been Caesar. They all knew it. So what matters? Getting the decision my way, to go my way on the floor of the Senate. That's really what matters. And I think, these all powerful so-called institutions aren't really there. But you do get very powerful corporations, you get very powerful banks, and I can see a banking conspiracy. I think that's nearly in front of people. Powerful politicians, inherited wealth and power. I think all that's going on. But to my mind, they don't really see eye to eye, and that's the saving grace in all of this.
Well, I think that is actually a wonderful place to leave off because we've gone about an hour now.
Oh my God.
Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and speak with me today to kind of share a little bit with our listeners. I had mentioned we're going to do a kind of a special edition thing, getting to know your co-host, and I hope that we have accomplished that goal today.
You've been the soul of courtesy and grace as usual, and it's always a pleasure chatting with you.
You as well, David. Now, I know that we have a couple of THA Talks regular editions here coming up soon. Hopefully we get a chance to work together on there again soon.
My dearest Seana, have a wonderful day. Take care.